Well, good morning, everybody. We're going to get started. And this is a hybrid meeting, so we appreciate that there's quite a few people in the room here at Chippewa Valley Technical College in Eau Claire. And we have actually more people online than we have in the room. So one of the advantages of technology is that we can be all together, but we can also bring people in who it's not convenient for them to come and spend 3 hours in Eau Claire. And we have some people coming to us from hundreds of miles away as far as attending our program. So we appreciate that very much. We appreciate your being here. We're going to have a few introductions to start with, and then we'll get into our program. So you're here for the annual meeting of the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition. My name is Scott Rogers. I am currently the chair of the board of directors of the coalition. So I've drafted to do the presentation and talk about some things, but you are going to hear from several other people as we go through the morning, and we will have you out of here no later than 10:30, and we'll be taking a break. I'm sorry, 11:30, and we'll be taking a break partway through. So way our agenda will look, in just a minute, we're going to have Jennifer Murray from Wisconsin DOT to give an update. We're going to start with her based on her schedule. She's actually in Madison and is joining us. And then I'm going to give a fairly comprehensive update of the work of the coalition, what we're all about, what's going on with the Chippewa-St. Croix Rail Commission, which has recently got a federal grant to explore locally sponsored passenger rail service. Then we're also going to have some updates from Ramsey County, who owns St. Paul Union Depot. Kevin Roggenbuck is going to join us remotely, and also from the Big Sky Rail Authority, and Dan Buck is going to join us from Montana. And then after our break, we have Derek Janes with us from Amtrak, and we're going to have a conversation after speaking with Derek with Joe Aiello from the Rail Passengers Association, kind of giving the national picture. Then we're going to conclude with the annual business meeting of the Rail Coalition. So we're going to give you a little bit of a call to action, and then very briefly have an election of directors. So if you don't want to stay around for that and you're not a member, you don't have to, although we'd encourage you to be a member and stay for that as well. I also want to thank Chippewa Valley Technical College for hosting us today. We have Adam Whaling over here, who is their Dean of Agriculture, Energy, Construction, Transportation, and Technology. Did I get all of them in there? Very active guy, but Adam also serves as CVTC's representative on the Chippewa-St. Croix Rail Commission as their ex officio person on that commission. I do want to point out real quickly as we get started some of the other leadership of the coalition. We also have our vice chair, Jackie Pavelski. Jackie, you want to raise your hand? We have our secretary treasurer, Mark Quam, and we want to thank Mark. He's the one running the controls for the Zoom today and trying to keep us all working. So we appreciate that. And then some of our other directors are here. We have Jack Hallbleib, Ann Schell is here, Dave Osnes, already introduced Jackie and Mark and me. Bill Anderson is here. I don't see Jim Dunning right now. Jim is very active, however, and Dan Schillinger. And then we have an ex officio member, Eric Anderson, who is our Metropolitan Planning Organization Director from the West Central Regional Planning Commission. So we appreciate your being here, but those are some of the people who are active in managing the association, and you can ask them questions at our breaks and that kind of thing. So the first thing we're going to do is find out what's up at Wisconsin Department of Transportation. Very active time right now. And what I'm going to do is introduce Jennifer Murray, who is the director of, and actually she has kind of a long title, not quite as long as Adams, I don't think. And Jen is also a member of the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission and the governor's designee. So let's, I don't know how the people on Zoom are going to be able to applaud, but at least those of us in the room, let's give a welcome to Jennifer Murray. Jen, go ahead and take it away.
All right. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, hi, I'm Jennifer Murray. I'm the Wisconsin Department of Transportation Bureau Director for our Bureau of Transit, Local Roads, Railroads, and Harbors. And yeah, it is one of the longest titles in the department. Today, I'm going to talk about WSDOT's efforts to work on the corridor identification program. And I really want to thank the commission there for the invitation today. I have this brief update on the Corridor ID program, which I'm sure you'll be discussing more in your meeting. This presentation is really just to give you a broad understanding of the program and to help you understand how Northwest Wisconsin fits into the statewide efforts that are going on. So in 2022, as part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the federal government authorized the United States Department of Transportation, Secretary of Transportation, through the Federal Railroad Administration, or FRA, to establish the Corridor Identification and Development, or what we term as the Corridor ID program, which really would build the foundation for a long-term rail program. And this also would facilitate the development of intercity passenger rails across the country. This slide shows a few of the multiple goals that the FRA had as they rolled out this and other programs through that law. Ultimately, the FRA selected 69 corridors across 49 states that were identified as initial corridor identification or corridor ID program recipients. FRA really hopes to upgrade 15 state and locally supported rail routes, add or extend service on 47 new routes that may not have any funding identified yet, and advance 7 new high-speed rail projects that will create a pipeline in total of passenger rail projects ready for implementation and potential future investment across the country. As part of establishing Wisconsin's passenger rail priorities, last summer, Wisconsin completed the Wisconsin Rail Plan 2050 update. As required by the Federal Railroad Administration, WISDOT has included a rail service and investment program. WISDOT used this program to develop their applications, our applications for Corridor ID. All of Wisconsin DOT's applications were accepted by FRA, which is awesome. We submitted 4 applications based on the Rail Plan 2050. They include increasing the frequencies on the Hiawatha between Milwaukee and Chicago, which would help create more frequent trains that would underline the ability to expand passenger rail in Wisconsin. The second one was adding an additional round trip between the Twin Cities and Chicago through La Crosse after a planned service expansion this year. Third was establishing a new service from Chicago to the Twin Cities through Madison and Eau Claire. And fourth was extending the Hiawatha from Chicago to Green Bay. Now that the corridors have been selected for future development and developed planning, FRA's next step is really to partner with the sponsors and prepare service development plans and scopes for those plans. This slide shows the steps in the corridor planning process where this program, Corridor ID, creates a framework for those potential projects that move from development scoping to further planning and creating that pipeline for future passenger rail projects, which could then be eligible under FRA's financial assistance programs. As mentioned earlier, all of Wisconsin DOT's applications were accepted. And then, as many of you may know, 2 other corridors sponsored by other entities in Wisconsin also received awards. One was submitted by yourselves there through the Chippewa-St. Croix Rail Commission and Eau Claire County for a corridor between Eau Claire and the Twin Cities. And the other one that was submitted was by Minnesota DOT for the Northern Lights Express, which is service running from the Twin Cities up to Duluth with a stop in Superior, Wisconsin. Individually, all these corridors will go through the corridor identification process. Some are visionary, some have existing service already, but the idea is really to understand next steps in planning and development for passenger rail. So, as I mentioned a few times, there are a series of steps that help build sort of this pipeline. All of the corridors start at step 1, and this is really a scope of service document that talks about roles and responsibilities and other refinements as we go into what's termed as service development planning. Step 2, service development plan, further refines all of those roles and responsibilities and understands important service improvements with our freight or host railroads that might be needed to support planning and development for passenger rail. And step 3 will then move into things like environmental clearance or the environmental assessment or environmental impact statements that are needed before you would get into final design and construction. The Corridor ID program will take a lot of time to work through these steps, and it's important to remember that actual physical infrastructure work could be many years away. Steps 4 and 5 on this slide, which are in green, final design and construction, are not funded through the Corridor ID program, but they also could be eligible for many of FRA's um, federal grant programs that assist with projects like that. So, what is WSDOT's plan for the 4 corridors? Because of the timelines and staff we have, we're going to schedule all of the state-run corridor IDs with the FRA in a phased approach. So first, the Milwaukee-Chicago increases to daily round trips will be WSDOT's first priority. We are currently at 7 daily round trips between the 2 metro regions, and we really want to increase them to 10 round trips. Increasing them to 10 will enable that future service north and west of Milwaukee. And we are going to begin this study immediately after the FRA grant agreement is executed this spring. Next, this summer, Wisconsin DOT will begin step 1 for the Chicago, Milwaukee, Madison, Eau Claire, Twin Cities corridor. WSDOT will begin looking at a scope of work for the service development plan, and we're going to analyze that route from Chicago to the Twin Cities through Madison and Eau Claire. And then in the spring of 2026, we will be planning to start the Chicago, Milwaukee, La Crosse, Twin Cities additional round trip, and in early 2027, that extension up to Green Bay. So as I mentioned, we're just on the front end of working with FRA on a grant agreement for the initial step 1 corridor scoping element. That will really be worked through on many of these corridors in the next month or so. And we'll be, on this particular corridor, the Chicago, Madison, Eau Claire, Twin Cities, really starting to work into completing that so that we can start this summer. Corridor scoping will start, and we will involve all of the participants, communities, potential service operators, the host railroads. Will begin to start developing a schedule, and that schedule will be for the service development plan effort, which is step 2. We'll also look at the types of budgets we might need to help supplement the service development plan. I should mention on this slide, you'll see a $500,000 federal amount at the top of the slide. That is the full amount that could be requested from FRA as part of step 1. Something that had made this program very attractive across the country is it didn't require any matches. And as we get into step 2, service development plan, that changes. There's a 10% match requirement on any service development plan that we would develop. So part of step 1 is looking at that and understanding how we would move into step 2. And here's another way to look at the scheduling. This was outlined in our application for the Corridor ID project for the particular corridor that will go through, the Eau Claire region. And again, just, emphasizing sort of these longer timelines in terms of what might happen. There's a lot of variables, a lot of unknowns, and we're really excited to work with all of you there in Northwest Wisconsin on, understanding your project and working on ours as well so we can have some synergies for passenger rail in the region. So with that, I want to say thank you, and I hope you have a great meeting today.
Thanks very much, Jen. And you can probably stop sharing. And then if you don't mind, we'll see if anybody has any questions. And actually, Mark, are you able to see if people online raise their hands if they have questions?
Yeah, I will in just a second.
All right. Jen, quick question for you on working together, and we're going to touch on that. But one of the things, we had our kickoff meeting with FRA, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But one of the things they emphasize is when you have overlapping corridors, it's important for the sponsors to work together. And you do have some overlapping corridors. Can you talk about what those might be and how you would intend to work with people on those?
Yeah, we'll work very, very closely with you. I know some of the Wisconsin DOT staff participated in that meeting. And as we move forward to identify sort of the different aspects of the corridor, we'll be involving you all, probably you, Scott, initially, and reach out and figure out how we're going to do that. FRA did talk with that at our kickoff meeting as well, and we fully expect to work with, the folks that need to be involved in the initial discussion so that we can get that scoping right for our service development plan.
And then I'm going to ask another question, and maybe somebody else will have one. But one of the routes that you talked about was the second train on what was called the TCMC, or Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago. And for everyone else, that's the current route through La Crosse. And when you say second train, you really mean third train. Because that's currently the Empire Builder, and then maybe give us an update on the first TCMC train that is being worked on to start pretty soon.
Sure. Yeah, so the Empire Builder is the long distance train from Seattle, Portland to Chicago that is fully Amtrak funded with the federal government. The second round trip, it would be the first state supported service besides the Hiawatha. And currently we're working to implement that. The details between all of the different parties are being negotiated. And we really look forward to making an announcement when all of the parties are ready to do so on when that will be ready for service. So there are some exciting things on that corridor going on. And, we just look forward to, the next steps as we move forward on that.
Yeah, sorry. I got to turn my mic back on, and then we do have a microphone in the room. So Derek has a question for you, Jen.
Good morning, Jen. How are you? Good to see you. You're larger than life up on that screen.
Scary.
Hey, I just wanted to just inquire about the host railroad coordination component. Is that a change from what the FRA was anticipating, how this would be handled in terms of the scoping, that coordination will be handled locally versus through the FRA?
I can't speak to exactly how FRA is thinking about that or conceptualizing it. I do know that part of step one is really to reach out to the host railroad and get them involved and understand sort of some of the things that they're thinking about as we move into service development planning. So, I mean, I expect that, whether it's WSDOT or FRA or even a local, in the case of the corridor there from Eau Claire to Twin Cities, we're just going to need to work together to figure out how we do that and what the engagement really is. So, and even from Amtrak's perspective, there are things that, we're all going to need to work on together. So I think we'll be continuing to have those conversations with you as well, and we'll figure it out.
Thank you, Jen.
Thanks, Derek.
Okay, I see there's an online question. And I lost it. It was up there. I think it was a question about how soon you start the Green Bay study and whether how you decided when to start which studies and not starting that one until 2027.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Frank. We have limited staff here at Wisconsin DOT that can focus on these corridors. And so we're really taking a step-by-step approach. You also have to remember the sort of concepts as we're building off of those increased frequencies between Chicago and Milwaukee is part of this whole effort. So I think, there are possibilities that some of this may change, but the current thinking and what we did submit to FRA in our application is that one would be sort of implemented at a little bit, delayed pace. The other part of that is there's a fair amount of work and effort that, compared to some of these other studies we're going to be really needing to do. And so because of that, we've got sort of the priorities for it are where we know we'll be able to make, maybe some decisions earlier on than later. So that's part of the decision that went into that.
Right. Any other questions? Jen, we appreciate your joining us. And I do want to remind everybody too that the program is being recorded. So if you want to, we'll make the link available later, and or if you didn't make it and you signed up. So
Scott, there is one question
Oh, I
from
missed
Bill
it.
Draves.
okay.
He wants to know, so for the first TMC, we hire, or, let's see, I can't read it. Oh, it says,
I
so
see
for
it.
the first, oh, you can see it. Great. Okay.
Yep. For the first TCMC, we have no timeline on a start date, ? And for those that may not be familiar, TCMC means Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago. All I can say is we are working hard through the negotiating process. And as we do that and we know more, we are going to be bringing that out when all parties are ready to do so. Everyone's very excited, and we're hoping to open it up yet this year. But again, things are being negotiated, so we're working through that process.
What's probably notable there is Jen did say yet this year. And so that is that project is very close to happening, whereas the rest of the projects in the Corridor ID program are very early in the planning stages. But you've done work on contracts with the railroad, where the stop's going to be, what the schedule's going to be, where's the equipment's going to come from. It's just finalizing all the details. Am I putting words in your mouth, or is that a fair statement?
That's correct, Scott.
So we will have additional options if we, even though we're not directly served by it, to go to Toma, La Crosse, Red Wing, one of the nearby communities, there will be more options than the single train a day. There'll be 2 trains a day in each direction. Before too long, we're hoping. I'd like to say it's imminent, but we'll see. Depends how much you stretch that word, right? All right, Jen, we appreciate you joining us today. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
All right, and Mark, we're going to kind of talk through our technology since we're doing that, but I'm going to need the slideshow back, and you might need to restart it. It seems like the clicker only works if you start it new. So go to that one.
Okay.
And then, well, go ahead and start it from where we are. That's fine.
Okay.
And then I will go ahead I can remind people of, just
You
click
want me
on
to
that.
resume or just hit slideshow?
Hit resume and we'll see what happens.
Okay.
There we are. We're in the same plot. All right. Actually, I will go back and just remind you of the schedule. So right now, and we are right on time, so we're running this railroad the way we should. Although we didn't put the times up there, so you don't know whether we're on time or not. We will be done by 11:30. So I'm going to give some updates and background about the Rail Coalition, what our role is, what the role of the commission is, and then I will bring on a couple other people near the end of my presentation to give some specific updates. They'll be online. And then our goal is to take a break around 10 o'clock, maybe a little bit before, a little bit after, and maybe we won't go quite that long. It may depend on questions. So we just heard from Jen, and usually give a little bit of explanation because there may be some of you that aren't familiar with this issue. And I'll ask those of you that have been involved for a long time to bear with me because you've seen some of this information before. But here in West Central Wisconsin or in Eau Claire, when people think of passenger trains, often they think of this. Anybody know what this is? This is the 400, which is a train that was started by the Chicago and Northwestern from Chicago to the Twin Cities, 400 minutes and 400 miles. And at that time, 400 was also sort of a connotation of the upper class of society. And so that stopped in Eau Claire and other West Central Wisconsin communities. Latter iteration of it was a streamlined diesel locomotive like this. And it was once very busy. You can see here's a bunch of people on a platform in Eau Claire getting on and off the 400. But it's pretty obvious by the way they're dressed that that is not a recent photo. And in fact, the 400 last ran in July of 1963. So our communities have gone a long time with no passenger rail service, where the others like La Crosse never lost it and continue to have it. During that time, especially in the 50s and 60s and 70s, we were putting all of our transportation investments as a country into highways and airports and other things like that. And we were envisioning our open roads and clear skies and easy travel. And sometimes the reality over time has been different, as we've had congestion, as we sometimes have weather, as we have costs, we have security in the airport. It can take longer to get in and out of security than it can to actually take your flight. And we are oftentimes talking about going back to the future. And this is actually a train station in Portland, Oregon that says go by train. You can tell it's an old train station. I don't think the sign is that old, but it's been there for many, many years. And people in the Pacific Northwest have lots of trains they can ride. They've been beefing up their service. I think if we check with Derek, they just actually added a bunch of trains between Seattle and Portland. You can also go to Vancouver and Eugene, Oregon. So we see that happening around the country. And the other things that we see happening even somewhat closer to home is a mid-sized city in Illinois, Normal, which has a state university. So a mid-sized city with a state university, that might sound familiar to us in Eau Claire. And they have had quite an economic transformation by developing the advantages of passenger rail service in Normal. And you may have read about Brightline, another concept in Florida, where service now from the Orlando Airport to West Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, Miami, and other places has launched and is becoming a significant transportation asset in that part of the country. So what about our area? The West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition has been around for a little while, and we believe that economic, demographic, social, transportation issues are converging, that it will be important for our economic future in our communities. So I'm going to mention a few entities here just to kind of explain what those are. I have the Eau Claire Area Chamber of Commerce up there because that's who I actually work for. I am the Vice President of Governmental Affairs. Jackie Pavelski, who I recognized earlier, actually had this job a few years ago and retired and was in and on the start of the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition. So the coalition has been around since about 1999 and is a nonprofit organization that works on research and information about passenger rail service. The Chippewa St. Croix Rail Commission, I'll talk about in just a moment, is actually a governmental organization formed by 3 counties and 6 municipalities. And the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission is an 8-state upper Midwest commission formed by compacts and legislation between those 8 states to do planning and coordination of development of passenger rail service in those states. And I'm going to touch on that during my presentation, give you an update as well. So the impetus of the Rail Coalition was this map. This is something called the Midwest Regional Rail Initiative that was actually led by Wisconsin and several other states beginning in the 90s to say we would really benefit from an intercity passenger rail system in the upper Midwest. Governor Thompson was one of the leaders of that, but the states involved, where you see the lines, talked about developing a system. What was missing then was any kind of federal funding. And if you know how transportation works, typically transportation projects have 80 or 90% federal funding. And there was no federal funding available for developing the system. So there was a lot of work by the states to see if we could get this moving forward. But it was hard to move forward without having a level playing field with other forms of transportation. And in fact, the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission is effectively the successor of this and is actually somewhat more of an official body working on this. However, I need to go back to the map and explain it. So the one thing you may notice about the map, if you can see it, is there's a couple nice solid blue lines in Wisconsin, but you see where Eau Claire is, you don't see Menominee, you don't see Hudson. And that red dotted line is a bus connection. And leaders from our community who went to Madison for various reasons said, well, we have a significant metropolitan population up here. Why aren't we on the map? And some of those leaders, we had our Momentum West Economic Development Organization. You may know some of these people if you've been around the community for a while. All three of these leaders have since passed on, but they were visionary people. Owen Ayers was the founder of the Ayers Associates engineering firm, Ray Willoughby, a local banker, and Bill Leinenkugel, the president of the brewery. And they saw this as something our community needed. And other people that were involved in starting it, like Bill Eilenfeld, who was the president of CBTC at the time, Jackie Pavelski, Bill Anderson, who's here, and others were involved in getting it started. And this is the mission of the Rail Coalition, to provide leadership and coordination to develop passenger rail service. Really a regional strategy, and reason for it was long-term sustainable economic growth, to be competitive in our communities. And so a lot of the leadership came from education, business community, and many public elected leaders have also been interested in it. And some of the arguments that have been made over the years by the Rail Coalition is that actually what we were working on was trying to have highway competitive intercity service to connect us both east and west to major communities, also local regional service. And when high-speed rail does come to the US, we think we can be a stop on the Chicago to Twin Cities line. And really the value of passenger rail service gets into things like using your time more effectively. How many here have been on a train within the last couple of years? A few, actually quite a few of you, and I guess I would expect that in this crowd. Some of you haven't, but one of the advantages of being on the train is, let's say I wanted to go to downtown St. Paul right now. How am I going to get there? I'm going to drive. Usually if I'm going to go to Milwaukee, I'm going to drive. What else can I do while I'm driving? We've seen people do other things, but you can redeem your time. You actually get your time back when you're on a train. The value of life, we often don't talk about that, but the number of people that are killed on the highways every year is sort of a tragedy, and it is much safer. And then the value of mobility, just the ability to get around as some of us who are baby boomers start to age and maybe aren't as able or willing to drive, and reaching also some of the mid-sized communities. Air service pretty much is now concentrated in the major metropolitan areas. So the future, we see the ability to have frequent trains, comfortable, be able to enjoy looking out the window, enjoy a beverage or food, more productive time, and also a way to bring leisure travelers to our area. And the arguments that we made is that we do have some of the fastest growing communities in Wisconsin, in our West Central Wisconsin region. We have the quality of life. We have 3 major state universities right on our line, plus our 2 technical colleges. And then a high percentage of our trips are to and from the Twin Cities. Before COVID, the number of vehicles crossing the St. Croix River at Hudson were about 100,000 a day. So there's a lot of traffic in this corridor. So the first efforts of the Rail Coalition were actually to get on the map. So we had a map that didn't have us on it. And as far back as 2004, Wisconsin DOT commissioned a study. And that study found that either running some of the Chicago to Twin Cities trains through Eau Claire and Menominee did make economic sense and would strengthen the overall system. And they found in Eau Claire to Twin Cities regional route also had economic justification. And over time then, this is the previous Wisconsin State Rail Plan map, shows a line, future line through Eau Claire and Menominee. This is actually the Minnesota Rail Plan. And if you can see it, there's a blue line that extends east out of the Twin Cities to Eau Claire. Because of the regional significance of our region, the Minnesota Rail Plan included Twin Cities to Eau Claire as a route. The Rail Coalition was working in a political environment which there wasn't a lot of interest in expanding passenger rail service in Wisconsin during the 2010s, even though the Hiawatha did continue to develop and was continue to grow ridership. And so we started looking around to say, okay, what's going on elsewhere that we should know about and we can take advantage of and learn for our region. So we saw things like Brightline developing in Florida. I already mentioned Normal, Illinois. And then we also learned that places where a joint powers authority, a commission, a local organization that sponsored or advocated for service, many of those services were the most successful services, both in terms of getting them going and as well as continuing their operation and growing ridership. So we saw that as some things that we should be thinking about. And as we went later in the stages then in 2021, Many of our public officials and counties and cities were saying, what more can we do to jumpstart this and move it forward? And so the counties of St. Croix, Dunn, and Eau Claire, the three counties between here and the Minnesota border, and then the municipalities you see here, Altoona, Eau Claire, Menominee, Baldwin, New Richmond, and Hudson, all passed resolutions to form a joint transportation commission, which is allowable under Wisconsin law. Now, it's not a regional transportation authority, and it doesn't have taxing authority, but it is a commission that can work to make things happen and to coordinate things. And I'll introduce Jim Dunning because he wasn't here right when we started. But Jim, if you want to raise your hand, Jim is another one of our directors. Jim is a supervisor in Eau Claire County. He actually chairs the commission right now. So these are the members of the commission. Once it was formed, they also invited the Rail Coalition to be a voting member and be involved. And then there are a number of ex officio members of the commission, including the host railroad, Union Pacific, over whose tracks we would operate, both the Minnesota and Wisconsin Departments of Transportation, the two counties in Minnesota that the service would run through, West Central Regional Planning, which is our metropolitan planning organization, and then our institutions of higher learning have been very involved in helping move this process forward, including the state universities at Eau Claire, Menominee and River Falls, as well as Chippewa Valley Technical College hosting us here today, and Northwood Technical College, which covers more of the western part of the route. And the purpose of the commission in its bylaws are to advance the public interest by pursuing passenger rail service and other public transportation improvements. And we call it the St. Croix and Chippewa Valley. So we call it the Chippewa St. Croix Rail Commission because economically we tend to talk about the Chippewa Valley and also the St. Croix River Valley as the economic drivers in our communities. And I just lost my clicker working. I don't know. There was something popped up. I don't know if we'll have to restart the slideshow. Yeah, it's not. Or if you can advance. Yeah, just go ahead and bring it up. Yeah. Maybe go ahead and hit escape, I think. Yeah, I don't, something, this is the way technology works, right? I saw something pop up on the screen and then when it went away, I couldn't click anymore. So go back to the share screen, go there, and then go ahead and start from where we are. See if we can resume slideshow. There we go. Okay. So going back to what we think the options are for passenger rail service, and it is more than one thing, and we think all of these could happen. One is a frequent regional Eau Claire to Twin Cities service. That's what we've been concentrating on the last few years. To be able to get on a train in Eau Claire, Menominee, and go to the Twin Cities and have enough options that it would be convenient for that short trip. We're also interested in through service from Chicago to Milwaukee to the Twin Cities and being on a stop on that. That's what you heard Jen Murray talk about, the WISDOT application for service through Madison and or Eau Claire. And even though we criticize bus connections, we would like to have them, especially until we get passenger rail service. And so one option is to look at having direct shuttle connections from perhaps Menominee and Eau Claire to Tomah, where you'd be able to get on a shuttle in our communities with an Amtrak ticket, go to Tomah and get on a train to Milwaukee or Chicago. And then finally, new long distance service to North Dakota, Montana, and the Pacific Coast. That's actually in the possibility too, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So I'm going to go through this really quickly, but we already have successful passenger train service in Wisconsin. The Hiawatha corridor between Chicago and Milwaukee has been one of the most successful in the country. It's getting back to its pre-COVID ridership. There are 7 trains a day. And in some ways, if anybody here ridden the Hiawatha? Not everybody, but it is, if you want a convenient, you can park at downtown Milwaukee and the Milwaukee airport for a substantially less cost than parking in Chicago, and you don't have the traffic. And the ticket on the Hiawatha is probably less than it costs to park in Chicago. And so highly recommend it. It's been very successful, but we have that to build upon here in Wisconsin. And it's an example that we can look at. And then we talked about that second train on called the TCMC, which got some federal grants. This is before the Corridor ID program. This is a map showing that route, and Wisconsin DOT has also talked about those potential shuttle connections between our communities and Toma to take advantage of that route. In fact, they are already doing something like that between Green Bay and Milwaukee. So there are 2 contracted Amtrak bus connections between 2 of the Hiawathas and the Fox Valley in Milwaukee. And I understand they're doing quite well, and gives you an opportunity to sort of move towards having future service. And a couple of years ago, Arun Rao, when he was with WisDOT, showed us this chart and said, here's some possibilities if we eventually would have shuttle service from Eau Claire and Menominee to Toma for the 2 train frequencies that stop there. So Jen McHugh is somebody I work with a lot, so I have some other Jennifers, but Jen Murray talked about the bipartisan infrastructure law, and you've probably read a lot about that, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but if you look at this chart, the number that is really significant is $66 billion in total funding over 5 years, and it's also what is called advance appropriations. So if you're a government nerd like me, and you know that every year, in fact, the government gets ready to shut down because they don't have all their appropriations done, these are something called advance appropriations for 5 years, and they aren't subject to the annual appropriations battle. And in fact, this is what the chart looks like. This is an FRA slide. So if you look at the red box there and look to the left, those are passenger rail funding from the federal government over the last 10 years. And then you look at each of these 5 years, and it's more than any that 10 years before. So this is significant, and it puts us much closer to a level playing field with other modes of transportation. So here in Wisconsin, this is the state rail plan map, and you saw Jen Murray showed this map earlier. And if you look up in our region, you see that there are 2 routes on that map. One is the bright green line, that is the Madison, Eau Claire, Chicago to Twin Cities route. And then you see a dark line between Eau Claire and the Twin Cities, which is the regional corridor. There are some brown lines in here to other cities like Stevens Point and Wausau. Those are potential either existing or potential bus connections that could work with the rail system. So as the bipartisan infrastructure law came out, a lot of people said, well, what might be able to happen with an expansion of passenger rail service? So Amtrak put out its Connects Us map. And if you zoom in on it, you see that they did include the routes in the Wisconsin Rail Plan as potential part of their vision. And in fact, those are now corridors that have been awarded by the FRA. And then there's another organization called the High Speed Rail Alliance. Actually, their director, Rick Harnish, spoke at this meeting last year. And they look a little bit farther out, and they say, what is the really long-term vision for a network? And they have a Wisconsin map that shows additional routes, such as you can kind of see the dotted thick line between the Neenah area through Stevens Point and Chippewa Falls to Eau Claire, so that you could have, for instance, Green Bay to the Twin Cities service, and also some direct service from Chicago to Madison through Janesville, which is another major population center in Wisconsin. And then as we look further out, the Federal Railroad Administration did a major study of a high level, way in the future, what should the Midwest system look like? They found that one of the highest travel markets was Chicago to the Twin Cities, and we are on that line potentially. They didn't get into stops. So going back to the FRA and the bipartisan infrastructure law and the $500,000 awards to get started, this is the solicitation on the Federal Register that came out from FRA in December of 22. The deadline to apply was March of 23. And you've already seen this slide. These are the sort of the pipeline that you get into once you move forward. And then I think the other thing that's significant, and Jen did touch on this, the improvements that we've seen up to this point, like the second train that's going to start, the Hiawatha service improvements. Up until this time, states, if they had a state-sponsored train, they had to fund 100% of any support that was required. There's no federal support. And then when they applied for grants, typically they were 50%. And some of the grants that they got for the TCMC improvements were like that. what's really significant about the bipartisan infrastructure law, and I keep having trouble saying it, but it's a mouthful, is that it moves it closer to a level playing field. So service development plan, 10% local funding. The other implementation, 20% local funding. And then there's another program under the bipartisan infrastructure law called the Restoration and Enhancement Grant Program. And it is a declining figure to help you get the service off the ground to make up 90, 80, 70, 60, et cetera, % of any operating support when you begin a new service. And so there's a lot less risk in local governments and state governments in getting services started under this program. So these are the routes that we heard about. Jennifer also showed this chart already as far as the ones that are moving forward. But in all, there were 7 projects that at least touch on Wisconsin, and including our 2 that are directly here in our region. And again, here's the map that shows the projects that were awarded. So we already talked about Chicago, Milwaukee, Madison, Eau Claire, Twin Cities. We'll be working with WISDOT on that. And I did want to bring you up to speed on the application we put in because it has some innovations to it. So this is the cover of the application that we put in. And I do want to acknowledge especially our transportation professionals that help make this happen. So Ann Schell, who is the retired MPO director here, Eric Anderson, the current MPO director, and Jeff Abbott, who is retired from WISDOT. Those are people that dealt with or deal with federal grants all the time, understand the language and how you have to get something put together. And they, along with Jeremy Gregert from the Eau Claire City Council, we were the committee that put together the application with FRA. There was a format you had to follow, but kudos to them for helping us put it together because the FRA did announce that they would fund this application. So this is the map that West Central Regional Planning did of the locations of potential stops on the route. And there are several things that we think are significant about the application we put in. Naturally, it meets transportation needs. You don't have a corridor unless there's a reason to have it, right? So we feel that there are a lot of travelers who would use this, whether they're using it for business, for pleasure, for family activities, that there is a market here and it does meet a missing transportation need. One of the other things that is different about our application is a competitive operator selection. And what that means is most of you probably, unless you've been in one of these presentations, have never seen these logos before or heard of these companies. But Herzog, Keolis, Transdev, and RATP Dev are all significant operators of passenger train services, but they do them on contract for other agencies. So they do them for commuter agencies, for the Connecticut Department of Transportation, et cetera. And they are interested in doing more of it. And so one of them, or Amtrak, could compete for the service that we're talking about. So we want to take advantage of that. There's also the idea that there is a lot to happen. If you saw there were 69 corridors awarded, how much and how quickly can Amtrak take it on? So there's opportunities to work with other carriers as well. And you won't be able to read any of the type on here, but these are, one of those carriers is Herzog, and they gave us this slide showing a map and some pictures of some of the trains that they currently operate in the US around different parts of the country. And this is a full list, and we'll make these available, but not a full list, but in some examples of places that these organizations run trains right now. So for instance, Keolis runs the Virginia Railway Express out of Washington, D.C. Herzog runs the New Mexico Rail Runner. Transdev actually runs, I don't think it's on here, but they run the Milwaukee streetcar, if you've ever run that. So those are some examples. And there is one example of a state DOT that selected Herzog to operate additional service, which is the CT rail service in Connecticut, that the state of Connecticut said, we're going to go with another carrier. In fact, Amtrak is on that route as well, and there's cooperation between Amtrak and CT Rail, and you can exchange tickets and that sort of thing. Another is a different model for access to the host railroad. So if you're not familiar, we're not going to build new tracks for these routes. to start with. We're going to use the tracks of the Union Pacific Railroad, which is the successor to the Chicago Northwestern, which ran the 400 many years ago. They've done a lot of investment in the route. It has the signaling systems that you need for passenger rail service, but they do have some capacity. And they have suggested that if the commission, or WSDOT, when we sponsor service on their line, if they can have a negotiated competitive access fee for their use of their tracks, they may require much less upfront capital to expand capacity or put the service. It would put it more on the same vein as freight service. And so we are working with Union Pacific on that possibility as well. One of the things that we've done as a commission as well as a rail coalition is look at various options to how we put all of this together. And one of the, a Swiss manufacturer named Stadler, who is now building trains in the US, came to us and said, we've developed a hydrogen fuel cell train, and this might be something we consider doing on this route as a test, because it's 100 miles. It'd be easy to run it back and forth. Even XL Energy is planning to do some investments in hydrogen fuel cell technology, so it might be something that work for our region. This is maybe it would be this, we'd look into it. It's not a requirement. And then finally, we think transportation-oriented development is an important part of making this work. We showed you a little bit about Normal, Illinois, and one of the benefits of having frequent service is you have a lot of economic activity around a train location. And so you get the benefit of the economy. There are even ways to do what you call value capture, where the economic activity, the growth and market value, et cetera, can be part of funding your service. And we have seen this happen. If anybody's been to Denver, they built out a whole transit system around their station there. Downtown Denver is just thriving, and the station is a great place to be. We talked about Brightline a little bit. A lot of what's happening there is they're developing the real estate around the stations. But even smaller cities like Normal, Illinois, this is a look at the Google Maps showing all the hotels, restaurants, other things that are right there around the station in Normal. And this is an article on the High Speed Rail Alliance's website that gets into some of the detail on that. And we're seeing that as you get housing near transportation nodes for older adults. This is AARP, who has endorsed more passenger train service in Wisconsin. This is an article from one of their publications. So we mentioned that the FRA grant has been given. We're very early stages. On the 22nd, which is just a week ago yesterday, the commission had its kickoff meeting with Federal Railroad Administration. So they'll be coordinating with Wisconsin DOT and others in moving forward on that grant, and there'll be a lot more to come. If you are interested in the commission, Eau Claire County has been kind enough to be the fiscal and administrative agent for the commission, and then Dunn County has been hosting the meetings. And so the next meeting is actually at the Dunn County Government Center, 8:30 a.m. on February 14th in Menominee, and it also is a hybrid meeting. So if anybody's interested in listening in online, you are more than welcome to do that. I'm running good on time right now. I have a couple things I want to cover, but maybe I'll take a pause. And of the things I've covered already, are there anybody that has a question? I know there's a lot of information. All right, I'm going to get a little bit more into why do we want to do this and the business support and how we can move forward as we need more state and local funding. And one of the things we have found, we talked about the fact that the start of the Rail Coalition locally was a lot of the business and education community said, you know, this is something we need for our area to be economically competitive. So here's a quote from Royal Credit Union, and they happen to have locations all along this corridor, and they're active actually in Minnesota now, headquarters in Eau Claire, that it helps make our area a destination, help for attracting talent. And that's one of the reasons. You're not gonna be able to read this, but I did want to let you know that a number of my colleagues across the state in business organizations have been interested in seeing the rest of us get the advantages that Chicago and Milwaukee have with the Hiawatha Corridor. So I've been working with the Green Bay Chamber, the Fox Cities Chamber, Milwaukee, and then also the Madison Region Economic Partnership. And what we did was we basically said what I just said. We want to take advantage of some of these things that Southeast Wisconsin has. And we came up with a statement that we're encouraging other associations and businesses to sign on. And that is that we do support it as a needed and worthwhile investment for the economic future of our state, that serving more cities help us attract and retain business. They're valuable to retaining talent and getting new talent, a alternative to driving, accelerating economic growth, improving the quality of life, increasing tourism, and adding resiliency to our transportation system. And these are a list of the organizations that have already signed on to this. There's a few that are statewide that you might have heard of. If you're local, you would be aware of Ayers Associates and Banbury Place and Royal Credit Union. There are other statewide organizations like Festival Foods. Actually, it's a good thing. We have, if you're here in person, we have some refreshments that Mark picked up at Festival Foods. So we appreciate that. And others like Mercury Marine, a little sports team called the Green Bay Packers, the Milwaukee Bucks, Molson Coors, Nicolay National Bank, Schneider National, and others. And then we've had several chambers of commerce across the state, several tourism organizations, and at several institutions of higher learning. So if you are in a business and you're not on this list, we would invite you to join it. And if you want information, let me know. So can we prove any of this? Are there any numbers that work? I showed this map before, and Wisconsin DOT and Minnesota DOT have a publication that talks about the value of the new service that's going to be started. And one of the things they did look at is the ongoing operating cost to a state like Wisconsin. It's going to be about $3.5 million a year. They found that the economic benefit to the state is several times that at about 25 million. And something very comprehensive that I learned at an MIPRC meeting, Missouri, which supports the St. Louis to Kansas City corridor to the tune of around $8 to $10 million a year. They did a comprehensive economic study of the value of that to the state of Missouri. And they found that their investment, because of the economic activity it creates, brings in more than $22 million in overall tax revenue. And so that's actually a return on investment just on that. And then they found that they have $208 million in annual economic activity because of providing that passenger rail service to their communities. And that's been very persuasive to their legislature, and their legislature has been open to expanding service and increasing funding. And if you follow politics, you would know that Missouri is a very conservative state. I do want to give you a report since the last meeting of the Interstate Passenger Rail Commission. We had our annual meeting in Chicago and Normal, Illinois. So we got a chance to go there back in September. And the picture you see here, you might recognize Jen on the right. That's Jen Murray. She is the governor's designee on the commission. I'm also appointed to the commission as the private sector representative. And then there are two state legislators from Wisconsin who are on the commission. One of them was not there, but the gentleman you see in the middle is John Spiros. John is from Marshfield, and he is a state representative in the assembly on the transportation committee, and he actively participated in the meeting. So just a few things. You can go vicariously along with me for just a moment in going to that meeting. We started out at Union Station and we got a tour of the station. Amtrak has been working on, okay, if we increase all these trains, what are we going to do here? Are we going to be able to handle all these people? And so if you look on the far lower left, that's Derek, who you're going to hear from in a few minutes, giving a tour of the station. And then we all got on one of the Lincoln service trains that goes to St. Louis and traveled together to Normal. So that's the Normal station in the upper left. And if you want to be technical about it, that's a northbound train. So that's not actually the train we were on. But you can see I have a capture there from just my cell phone speedometer. There are parts of that route that we were running at 110 miles per hour. We talked about experiencing normal. I got to walk around the community, see what it was like. And then we had several meetings. In the picture in the upper right, that's Chris Coos, the mayor of Normal, who was a part of making all this happen. In fact, he was just confirmed to the Amtrak board. And then the other two people in the upper right, I'll just mention. The vice chair is Peter Anastor, who is with the Michigan DOT. And the lady in the middle was the chair until last year and still on the commission, Senator McGinn from Kansas, a Republican. And then you can sort of see other things going on at the meeting there. And we did get some reports on things. And then this is actually a Facebook page post that Representative Spiros made on his legislative Facebook page about participating at and learning about some good things happening on passenger rail service. So these are the states that are part of the commission, and I'm not going to go through all their reports, but just to give you a snapshot and a couple items that were of interest. I mentioned Missouri is looking at doing more things. So they're looking at getting to more cities like St. Joseph, Hannibal. And then one thing that's nearby to Wisconsin is the state of Illinois is working with Union Pacific and Metra to run some trains from Chicago to Elgin on current Metra routes and then to Rockford. So that's a project that is funded and moving forward. So I got to get there by train and I got home by planes, trains, and automobiles. And I'll just touch on that a minute. But so most of the group went back towards Chicago, but there were several of us that got on a southbound train. So you can see me on the left in the lower part there. We have people there from Missouri, from Amtrak in the middle. The third from the left is Greg Mathis from Minnesota DOT. And then the other two gentlemen are from Missouri and from Kansas. And so we were kind of heading in that direction. And as I said, it was kind of a planes, trains, and automobiles trip for me. So we got on the train in Normal and went to St. Louis. Then I took the light rail from Gateway Station to Lambert Field. Then I flew Delta from Lambert Field to MSP. And then I took the Green Fleet Tesla shuttle from MSP to Eau Claire. So, and I made all the connections. One of them was a little bit tight. But that's a little bit about what's going on with MIPRC. And in fact, its annual meeting this fall will be after the election, so we can kind of assess where we are. And it'll be November 18th to 20th, and it's going to be hosted in St. Paul. So we'll be looking forward to doing that. One of the things we want to do here is give you updates that you need. And it turned out that the same day of our meeting today, there are a number of DOT officials from various states in Washington, D.C. For a meeting, and they couldn't be here. And so you won't remember who it was, but I had traveled with Greg Mathis back from Minnesota DOT. I did talk to him last week. He couldn't join us today, but he had a couple things he suggested that we mentioned. So you heard Jen Murray say that Wisconsin completed its state rail plan last summer. Minnesota is in the early stages of updated their plan. So you can actually go to their website and look at input to the Minnesota rail plan if you're interested in doing that. So we encourage you to do that as well. And then he also wanted me to pass on that there are two studies that were mandated by the Minnesota legislature in its last session and funding provided for. And those, the timeline on those, they are looking at the feasibility of extending the North Star commuter rail, which currently goes to Big Lake to St. Cloud. And they actually will be coming out with information about that next month. And then they also were asked to study Twin Cities to Fargo-Moorhead additional service during the daytime. So the Empire Builder continues west of the Twin Cities up through St. Cloud, Staples, and Detroit Lakes to Fargo-Moorhead. Fargo-Moorhead is a major economic center, and the trains go through there in the middle of the night. So there's interest in having additional service, just like the TCMC in Wisconsin. And so in February 25, MnDOT is planning to have a study out talking about what's going to be involved in the feasibility of that. And I think Jen had mentioned that the Northern Lights Express between the Twin Cities, Superior, and Duluth was one of those that was awarded FRA funds. So we're going to go to a couple other speakers here in just a second.
Scott, there
yes.
are a couple chats that come in, but I don't want to open them up unless you're done with your.
I think,
slideshow.
yeah, I will. I'm gonna go to this just to tell you who the next speaker is going to be with a brief update. And I presume Kevin is on, so you can stop my slideshow. And then if we have a couple questions, I think we have time to take them. And anybody in the room have a question? All right, put you asleep, I think so. And you say there were a couple questions? Yeah, if we can find them. We already answered that.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, maybe there's not anything new.
No, I guess not. It just, oh, wait, yeah.
Okay, is there substantial funding? So we have that 5-year funding window of $66 billion. It gets a little complicated to get into it, but as Jen mentioned, so the Corridor ID program is a fairly small part of the funding, because if you think about it, they awarded, it's big money. I don't have it in my wallet, but they awarded 69 corridors that each got $500,000. So divide 69 by 2, and that's roughly $35 million out of 66 billion. And so there's ongoing funding that'll be available for the service development plans and design and construction, and that is in place. And FRA has, I think, been fairly clear that if you were awarded a Core ID grant, you are in the pipeline and you're going to get preference for these future things like federal-state partnership. It doesn't mean there's an unlimited pool of money, but it's much more than we've ever seen. And it's an opportunity to really develop some corridors. Were there any other questions?
Derek.
Yeah, Derek. And do you have the microphone? Here we go.
Thank you, Scott, for that answer. I would just suggest that the reauthorization for passenger rail, as for all transportation programs, takes place about every 5 to 7 years. And continued funding or continuing to include robust passenger rail funding in those future reauthorizations will be very important to seeing these corridors actually implemented. So the expectation and the hope is that we put in place a program that is solid, that starts to show success, so that the Congress, future Congresses and future administrations continue to fund it, just as they continue to fund other transportation modes.
Right. And there's a danger I might have implied that all the funding is already in place, and most of that is for the development but the ongoing work here is important. So